ready to debate Donald Trump. I have agreed to the previously agreed upon September 10th debate. He agreed to that previously. Now it appears he's backpedaling, but I'm ready. And I think the voters deserve to see the split screen that exists in this race on a debate stage. And so I'm ready. Let's go.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are taking direct aim at each other as the presidential race enters its post-Biden phase. I'm Valerie Castro in for Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. We are 103 days away from the November election, and things are just starting to heat up. Today, Harris released her first campaign ad. She also delivered the keynote address to thousands of members of the most powerful teachers union in the country over in Texas.
Donald Trump and his extreme allies want to take our nation back to failed trickle-down economic policies. We are not going back. We are not going back.
Also, NBC News learned that former President Barack Obama is getting ready to endorse Harris for president soon, giving her that last big missing piece as she takes over the Democratic Party. And about that VP pick, NBC News can confirm that the campaign has requested vetting materials from these 5 candidates. There doesn't appear to be any real front runner at the moment, but we can report that Republicans see Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro as a, quote, super strong VP contender. NBC's Yamiche Alcindor has more on all of it.
Well, it was another busy day for Vice President Harris. This morning, she spoke at the American Federation of Teachers Convention. She told the major teachers union that unions were key to building the middle class. She also criticized Republicans and said the GOP wants to ban books and Democrats want to ban assault weapons. Later, back at the White House, she also met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. She spoke to reporters after that meeting. Take a listen.
To everyone who has been calling for a ceasefire, and to everyone who yearns for peace, I see you and I hear you. Let's get the deal done so we can get a ceasefire to end the war. Let's bring the hostages home, and let's provide much-needed relief to the Palestinian people.
And her office said she planned to convey her view that it is time for the war to end in a way where Israel is secure, where all hostages are released, and the suffering of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can enjoy their right to dignity, freedom, and self-determination. And of course, also, I should note that the vice president picked up a new endorsement. My colleague, Ryan Riley, and I obtained a letter exclusively where more than 40 former Justice Department officials who served under presidents who were both Democrats and Republicans endorsed Harris. They wrote in part, the fabric of the nation, the rule of law, and the future of democracy are at stake in this election. They also called former President Trump a grave risk to the country. And if that wasn't enough, we're, of course, still keeping a close eye on who she might choose to be her running mate. There's a long list of people that we can put up, but I'm hearing from a number of sources that Roy Cooper, who is the governor of North Carolina, Senator Mark Kelly, who's the senator from Arizona, as well as Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, are top on that list. It doesn't mean that they're finalists, but that does mean that there are just sort of a lot of people who are talking about those names. And of course, the list continues to sort of evolve here as we continue to stay close to our sources. And of course, she doesn't have a lot of time to make this decision. So it's going to be sort of a lot in flux in the next couple of weeks. Back to you.
Okay, Yamiche, thank you. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump seems to be struggling to come up with new material to go after Vice President Harris. So for now, he has settled on the claim that she is a left-wing radical. Here he is this morning, calling into Fox News.
This place, I think if he goes, she then takes over, and she's worse than he is. I really believe she's a San Francisco radical. She's actually, I think, a much worse candidate.
The Harris camp responded with an email a few minutes later with a subject line that read, quote, statement on a 78-year-old criminal's Fox News appearance. But it's not just the attacks. Trump seems to want to go after Harris in other ways, too. He has filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission claiming that the transfer of Biden's $96 million campaign war chest to Harris is against the law. And he sent a letter to all of the major networks, including NBC, demanding equal airtime in light of Biden's primetime address last night, arguing that what Biden did was tantamount to a campaign speech, even though he is no longer technically a candidate for the White House. Let's bring in criminal defense attorney Misty Maris for more on this. Misty, the letter for more airtime, does this thing have any merit since an exemption for, quote, bona fide news events like presidential speeches and news conferences was created?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have merit because it would fall under that exception. So the equal airtime rules relate to giving candidates the opportunity to have a platform in an equal way with respect to their candidacy. So when you have an incumbent president who's making an address to the nation, there's a carve out for that. And it's an important carve out because otherwise it would technically preclude a politician or a president in that position from making speeches to the American public. So it simply wouldn't make sense. So it's very likely that Biden's address would fall under that exception to the general rule of equal air and not be something that needs to be tit for tat with Donald Trump.
Okay, and how about this complaint to the FEC about the campaign funds? Does that have any teeth?
This to me is a really big long shot. Now, all that being said, we're talking about an unprecedented legal situation here where a candidate is being replaced by the vice president. So what basically Donald Trump is arguing in this complaint to the FEC is that this is what's called an excessive campaign contribution. So this money was to go to the Biden campaign, and now all of those forms, the technicalities that go to the Election Commission have replaced his name with Harris, and thus she is not entitled to that money, and it's a violation of the law. Well, on the flip side, with respect to the rules, until there's a party convention, so the Democratic convention, that particular candidate hasn't necessarily become the official candidate yet. Also, Harris is on those forms as well as the vice president. It's the Biden-Harris campaign. So while Trump is raising a novel argument with the FEC, it doesn't really seem to have legs. Another factor to keep in mind, FEC is a federal agency. There are 6 individuals, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. In order for them to take action, you have to have a majority vote to move forward. So I don't think it's likely that this particular action goes anywhere, but we could see Trump trying to file for an injunction in federal court down the road.
All right, we'll see if that happens. Misty Maris, thank you. Today, 2 high-stakes meetings at the White House. This afternoon, President Biden met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during his first visit here since the October 7th attack, after which Netanyahu met with Vice President Harris. His visit to the White House comes just one day after his controversial speech before a joint meeting of Congress. But inside the Oval Office, it was all smiles.
So from a proud Jewish Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the State of Israel. And I look forward to discussing with you today and working with you in the months ahead on the great issues before us.
Let's bring NBC's chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander from the White House for more. Peter, the leaders were expected to discuss the ceasefire agreement. Was anything achieved there?
It's a good question, Valerie. This is, importantly, the first time these 2 leaders have been together face-to-face since President Biden visited Israel in the early days immediately after October 7th. And with time running out to close a ceasefire and hostage deal before he leaves office, the president today, we are told, pressed the Israeli leader on this issue. A national security official telling us the president would make the argument that it's time to close the gaps in the negotiations to get the hostages home and to end the war. And ahead of this visit, some officials had indicated the president would exert more pressure on Netanyahu and to try to take a tougher tone to emphasize the urgency. Clearly, though, they still remain a great distance away, it appears, from any final agreement.
And we know Biden and Netanyahu also met with the families of American hostages being held in Gaza. Here is some of what they said.
With a sense of urgency. As you know, as time goes forward, the likelihood of getting our hostages home, our loved ones home, alive and recovering the bodies of those who have already been murdered, becomes less and less likely.
Peter, we've heard that message from those families before. What more do we know about their meeting with those leaders?
So the White House, in a lot of ways, I think, put Netanyahu on the spot by inviting those American hostage families to meet with both him and with the prime minister and with President Biden. That was unprecedented. We're told that the meeting lasted roughly an hour. The hostage families, you saw some of them there gathered, speaking to reporters. That was Jonathan Decherhen that you were hearing. His son, Gadi, was taken that day 293 days ago. He says that he feels more optimistic now than he has since the first round of hostage releases, which were late last year. He said that they got an absolute commitment from both the Biden administration and from Netanyahu himself that they understand the urgency of this moment. It is notable, though, that earlier those families expressed their disappointment after Netanyahu's defiant speech to Congress. Gadi's father, who you just heard from, even calling that speech shameful, Valerie.
And finally, shifting gears to Vice President Harris, this meeting comes at a particularly important time for her as she's forced to consider her messaging on Israel. Did she signal how she'll handle the issue as she moves forward with her campaign?
Well, in a lot of ways, what she said was very similar to what we've heard from President Biden. To be clear for the vice president, this was her first meeting with Netanyahu since the president dropped out of the 2024 race. She had declined to preside over his speech, Netanyahu's speech, yesterday, and she did echo the administration's position. She detailed her commitment to Israel's right to defend itself, the need to get the hostages home, to get a ceasefire deal done, and Palestinians' right to freedom and self-determination. The ultimate goal, she said, being a two-state solution. That is the policy here. She was particularly firm, I thought, in describing how she expressed to Netanyahu her serious concern about the scale of human suffering and civilian death in Gaza. She said on that she will not be silent. And today she also denounced the actions of some of those protesters who vandalized parts of D.C. She called those acts despicable, but also did seem to have a message for those who are peacefully demanding an end to the war, saying, I see you and I hear you. Valerie?
Peter Alexander at the White House tonight. Peter, thank you. Right now, wildfires are raging up and down the West Coast, forcing thousands of evacuations across California, Washington, and Oregon. The Durkee Fire in Eastern Oregon is currently the largest active wildfire in the country, burning nearly 270,000 acres since it sparked over a week ago. In the past couple of days, it merged with another wildfire and forced a stretch of a major highway to close. Meanwhile, in California, the Park Fire burning north of Sacramento is now the state's largest wildfire of the year so far. Officials confirmed they arrested a man suspected of starting the fire. It rapidly spread in just hours, destroying multiple homes. Take a look at what happened when those flames came in contact with propane tanks in one neighborhood. A time-lapse video gives you a look at how the fire scorches everything in its path. A camera at one point suddenly went offline, possibly destroyed by the fire itself. We have team coverage tonight. NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman will have the forecast. But first, let's go to NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky, who is tracking the Park Fire in Chico, California for us tonight. Morgan, what's the latest on containing the fire? And tell us more about that arrest that was made in connection with how this all started.
Yeah, Valerie, bizarre cause here. Containment last measured by fire officials at just 3%. That smoke plume rising high in the sky behind me here in Chico. This is a community that knows wildfires all too well. And the firefight against this particular blaze has been a tough one. As you mentioned, they took that man into custody today, accused of arson. Authorities say that this man is accused of pushing a flaming vehicle into a ravine in an incredibly dry area, and that was the spark. That was the cause of this fire just yesterday afternoon. In just about 24 hours, Valerie, it has now reached more than 70,000 acres here, fueled by the winds that we've been feeling all day long and incredibly dry conditions that's left a lot of the wooded area behind me just ripe for, unfortunately, this kind of fire. We're told that they did have one advantage here that they haven't had in years past, and that is they were able to fight this fire 24/7 here, Valerie, from the air, because CAL FIRE says that they have helicopters that can actually make water drops during nighttime. Any bit of help they could have was absolutely useful, because, as we mentioned, it's just 3% contained today. Multiple structures destroyed. Fortunately, no reports of any injuries or deaths at this time, though. Valerie.
Morgan, I think you just touched on this, but how has the fire been able to spread so fast? And given that, are people able to get out in time, able to evacuate?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we do know that everyone's been able to get out of those hardest hit areas. We had a chance to drive down one particular street today where multiple homes were destroyed by the flames. But again, officials saying that people, for the most part, have been responsive to the evacuation orders, which have been issued starting yesterday. One good point that a firefighter told me, and he says if you wait until you see the flames, that can often be too late. You need to get out ahead of time so that firefighters can move in time to save structures if possible. Valerie.
Morgan, we also mentioned the Durkee fire in Oregon. What's the situation with that one?
Yeah, this is a unique fire in that it was started by a lightning strike about a week ago in an incredibly remote area in the state, and it's just continued to churn and chew through vegetation there, densely forested areas, making the fight incredibly tough. 250,000 acres, that is a significant swath of land there. We know that there have been multiple road closures over the last week or so, and containment is coming, albeit slowly. And unfortunately, Valerie, here, conditions absolutely not helping fire crews whatsoever. We know that here in Chico, as well as Oregon, there are triple digits in the forecast for at least the next several days. Valerie.
Okay, Morgan, thank you for that important reporting. Let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman with more. Michelle, a lot of these fires, aside from the one that was believed to be human-caused, are being sparked by lightning strikes from what's called dry thunderstorms. Tell us more about that.
Hi there, Valerie. Great to see you. Well, dry thunderstorm is a thunderstorm that happens aloft. The rain will fall, but it falls into a really dry atmosphere. So the rain will completely evaporate, or it will evaporate for the most part. So when that doesn't hit the ground, it doesn't hydrate that really dry vegetation, but the lightning strike does. That's where we see the lightning strike hitting the dry vegetation. And then we get that outflow boundary from the thunderstorm. So it kind of creates its own little weather system, and the wind will blow, and it can really push fires along if it does spark a fire. Let's talk about what's happening tonight, because we're seeing those thunderstorms happening right now. You can see on radar lots of little spotty showers across the Intermountain West where we are seeing these really dry conditions. We have severe thunderstorm watches, severe thunderstorm warnings. Notice Montana, Glasgow. You're seeing that, and we're seeing these thunderstorms all the way through portions of Nevada, Utah, into Idaho, Wyoming, and also into Colorado. And we have that threat as we go through this evening. So we're going to see the chance for these thunderstorms and dry thunderstorms, especially where you see that yellow shading. That's where we could see severe storms with those really gusty winds. And we see elevated fire risks as we go throughout the rest of tonight, where you see this yellow, Great Falls, Lakeview, places like Bowman, also Rapid City, Scotts Bluff. You have an elevated risk for fire danger. That's because it's hot. Morgan mentioned those hot temperatures. It's windy, and then we have the threat for those dry thunderstorms. And then in addition to that, as we go throughout today, even tomorrow, keep in mind also, it's just July. We started the peak season of wildfire season in July. It goes all the way through October. And over the past few years, it's even extended past that. So we have a lot of time to get through for the risk of wildfires. This is the red flag warnings in terms of fire danger. As we go throughout tomorrow, we're looking at all that red shading. That's going to be the risk where we could see some fires tomorrow as well. Valerie?
Michelle, with so many fires burning at the same time, how is this impacting the air quality, not just in the Northwest, but across other parts of the country?
Yeah, so this is a really neat graphic, really telling us what's happening and really telling kind of the story of, yes, we're seeing all these fires in the West, but look how far this smoke blows. So it's into the Intermountain West, it's into the Midwest. Actually, let me go back to that. And then it's streaming all the way to portions of the Midwest and also into parts of the East. And that's the tricky part, because we're looking at that wildfires mainly in the West, mainly in the Intermountain West, but this goes well beyond that as that smoke does go well past that. So we're going to see that as we go throughout the next couple of days. We are watching these fires burn with no sight of extinguishment, and we are seeing this wildfire season again as we go throughout the next couple of months. So we have air quality alerts. This is a map where we're seeing that really hazy conditions. We're seeing the smoke. We're seeing Spokane, Boise, Burns, Kearney, where we're going to see places where you need to close the windows, close the doors, and stay indoors if you can. Valerie?
All right, a lot to keep track of. Michelle Grossman, thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
And don't go anywhere. We're just getting started. Up next, a school officer appears in court today facing charges in that 2022 deadly Uvalde shooting. Plus, we ask climate activists what they think of Kamala Harris. NBC's Chase Kane will be here with more in tonight's Temperature Check. And later this hour, the future of exercise. Why hire an expensive trainer when you have AI? Maya Eaglin takes a closer look at how artificial intelligence is advancing fitness. That's all ahead, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Next week, the acting director of the Secret Service will testify before 3 Senate committees about the failed assassination attempt on former President Trump. The hearing follows today's briefing with the Secret Service and the FBI. Kimberly Cheadle resigned as director of the Secret Service on Tuesday after bipartisan calls for her to quit, and Ronald Rowe Jr. replaced her as acting director. SAG-AFTRA is on strike again. Hollywood video game performers voted today to go on strike, citing concerns over AI protections in a proposed new contract. It's something that was a crucial sticking point in last year's strikes. While actors and writers came to a deal with studios in the fall, negotiations between video game actors and major game developers have continued for almost 2 years. Here in New York, officials will begin testing gun-detecting scanners inside subway stations. It's the latest effort to address riders' concerns about crime, although some argue it's a pricey effort, with each scanner costing over $100,000. Mayor Eric Adams says the pilot will launch soon, but did not give a specific date. The U.S. economy grew a lot more than expected. According to the latest report from the Commerce Department, GDP increased at a 2.8% pace, while inflation cooled and allowed consumers to keep spending despite high interest rates. And it's the end of an era for Billy Joel, who is performing his final show of his record-breaking franchise run at Madison Square Garden tonight. The concert will be his 150th lifetime show at MSG and will conclude his 10-year residency there. Playing for over 2 million people, the Piano Man was the Garden's first ever residency. A tense scene at a courthouse in Uvalde, Texas today. A former police officer accused of inaction during the shooting at Robb Elementary School coming face to face with parents of the victims.
Say something to us. Sir, with all respect, you were smiling. You can't even say sorry to us.
NBC's Guad Venegas has more. Guad?
Valerie, it was an emotional day here in Uvalde at the courtroom that is across the street from the town square, where more than 2 years ago, thousands of people arrived and created a memorial for the victims of the school shooting here in Uvalde. So family members packed that courtroom waiting for Adrian Gonzalez to arrive. Mr. Gonzalez arriving with his legal team for a quick hearing. He pled not guilty to the 29 counts of abandoning or endangering a child. He's the second officer to face charges after the former police chief of the school district police department, Pete Arredondo, was also indicted with the same charges. The judge spoke to both his attorneys and the prosecutors, and they went over some details about the legal process and how things will go moving forward. The judge also set the next date for September 16th for the next hearing. That'll be the next time when Gonzalez is expected to be back in court for a pre-trial hearing. Now, after the quick hearing, he walked outside with his attorneys, and his lawyer, one of his attorneys, spoke to the media and said this about the charges.
Well, he feels he's innocent. He feels all he did was show up to try to help those children. I mean, look, there is justifiable righteous anger in this situation. I mean, our position is, should that anger be directed to Mr. Gonzalez? Our humble opinion is it should not. We have not seen any evidence that would show us that it should.
Now, as his attorney was speaking to the media and talking about the charges against Mr. Gonzalez walked away towards his vehicle. He was attempting to leave while all of the attention was on his attorney. The family members of some of the victims were waiting for him, and they were yelling at him, asking him if he was sorry. A lot of these family members had arrived today wearing T-shirts with photographs and names of some of those victims. We did speak to the father of one of the victims, and this is what he had to say about the charges against Mr. Gonzalez.
What you did was you thought that your life was more important than our children's. Why didn't you let the parents go in that were trying to rush? We would have been the first one in. They would have taken the bullets, you know? So it's cowardice all over, and every single one of those officers are guilty.
Now, moving forward, a lot of parents here are wondering if more charges will be brought against any other officers. We know that hundreds of officers arrived that day, the day of the shooting. It was multiple agencies. So both Peter Redondo and Adrian Gonzalez are members, or were members, of the Uvalde School District Police Department. That was the first agency to respond. But other agencies, local agencies, county, state, and federal, did respond that day. There was a Justice Department report that indicated there were multiple failures in the response that took place that day. But as of now, only 2 officers have been indicted. So we'll have to wait and see if more charges are brought against any of the other officers that arrived that day. Back to you, Valerie.
Okay, Guad, thank you. Change is in the air for Southwest Airlines. They're parting ways with a 50-year-old tradition. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa has the story.
A major change of course for Southwest Airlines, announcing today it will soon start assigning seats and selling some with extra legroom, ending more than 50 years of its famous, or for some infamous, model of open seating, where boarding can build into a mad dash.
You got people just running in front of you.
And while some Southwest superfans are disappointed,
I love open seating. That's why I fly Southwest.
The discount carrier CEO says the move is a bid to boost revenue and adapt to travelers' evolving tastes, reporting 80% of Southwest customers want an assigned seat, especially on longer flights.
When a customer defects from Southwest to another competitor, it's the #1 reason, so it's the right thing at the right time.
Despite this summer's record travel, many airlines are grappling with overcapacity. Southwest recorded a 46% drop in profit from last year, facing growing rivalries with other budget options.
What kind of headwinds is the airline facing right now?
They have simply added too many seats when it comes to basic economy seats. In other words, the seats that people are buying at the lowest possible fare. So many have been added into the system, not just by Southwest, but by other airlines as well. It's put a lid on fares.
Southwest says bookings for assigned and premium seats will become available sometime next year. The change still requires updating the cabin layout and FAA approval.
All right, Emily Aketa, thank you. Coming up, we'll tell you about why some climate activists are rallying behind Vice President Kamala Harris ahead of November's election. But first, you got to see this. A Texas man crashed his car and got trapped between 2 highway barriers before it caught on fire last week. Lucky for him, Officer Eduardo Hernandez arrived at the scene and tried to put the fire out, but the flames persisted. So he took matters into his own hands and broke the driver's side window open, cut through the airbag, and pulled the driver out before the car was engulfed in flames. They are said to be doing okay. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order today giving officials the green light to start clearing homeless encampments. The move comes after a Supreme Court ruling last month gives local officials more freedom to clear encampments and ticket people for camping on public property. A grocery store in Colorado will soon sell ammunition in vending machines. Ammo company American Rounds will have them up and running as early as the end of this month. The machines scan IDs and use facial recognition to verify people's ages, and you can see how customers buy bullets with just a few taps on the touchscreen. And California upheld a law that labels Uber and Lyft drivers as contractors instead of employees. This ends a years-long legal dispute over how drivers for the company should be classified. The law has the support of more than half of California's voters, but labor groups say the law keeps gig workers from getting benefits such as minimum wage, overtime, and sick leave. Now for a temperature check election edition, there is an argument to be made that President Biden has been the most consequential president for climate action in U.S. history. In 2022, Vice President Harris cast the tie-breaking vote to pass Biden's $269 billion climate bill known as the Inflation Reduction Act. Donald Trump has said he would repeal that law and many of Biden's environmental regulations. So how are climate activists viewing the election now that Kamala Harris is at the top of the ticket? Here's national climate reporter Chase Kane.
Both in Milwaukee, only 5 days apart, two distinct views on climate change.
He literally promised big oil companies, big oil lobbyists, he would do their bidding for $1 billion in campaign donations.
We will drill, baby, drill.
The same phrase appears in the official Republican platform calling for an expansion of oil and gas production, the liquid gold under our feet, which would further heat the planet. And despite that clear divide, some climate activists never fully supported President Biden. A protest through Manhattan last fall highlighted views he didn't do enough to stop our use of fossil fuels.
Pass the torch, Biden.
And that dissatisfaction continued until last week in Washington.
We need a new generation of leadership, people who are articulate and bold and passionate and who can fight for us. Joe Biden is too old to really fight the fight. He's done some good things for the environment with the Inflation Reduction Act, but his time has come.
And since the president stepped aside, a number of climate action groups have enthusiastically lined up to support Kamala Harris. But what makes her more appealing than Biden? Well, one reason dates back to 2005, when, as San Francisco District Attorney, Harris created an Office for Environmental Justice. And that was before some first-time voters this year were even born.
Yeah, she has a history, and I think specifically she has a history around holding big oil accountable in a way that we haven't been able to do in the last 4 years.
Aru is the executive director of the Sunrise Movement and highlights Harris's opposition to oil, coal, and gas, the primary drivers of climate change. In 2015 and 2016, as California Attorney General, Harris investigated and sued oil and gas companies. In 2019, she became an early sponsor of the Green New Deal. And in 2020, Harris campaigned against fracking and offshore drilling.
Okay, Kamala Harris wins, first 100 days in office. These are the big things she's got to tackle with climate change first. What's at the top of your list?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would love to see a bill that really puts forward how tackling climate change can decrease our cost of living and improve our lives. I think that includes housing, education, and jobs first and foremost. So I think that there is a really big chance that we're able to get bigger wins under Harris administration.
All right, and Chase Kane joins me now. Chase, Republicans are also using Harris's climate record against her. There's a clip that has been making the rounds from a 2019 CNN town hall. Let's watch that first.
There has to be also what we do in terms of creating incentives that we will eat in a healthy way, that we will encourage moderation, and that we will be educated about the effect of our eating habits on our environment.
Do you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
You know, the food pyramid, what people
yes.
to reduce red meat specifically?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so eating habits, red meat. Is she talking about a red meat ban? And what connection is there to climate change and our diets, the food that we eat?
Yeah, no, the vice president is not campaigning or advocating for a ban on red meat. And the question there was even about guidelines. But, the vice president is campaigning on things like women's rights, gun violence, and yes, climate change. And when we think about food in the context of climate change globally, agriculture and our food systems do account for about a third of global emissions. But when we think about personal choices, it would go much farther for you to think about like composting your food than for you to think about, never eating red meat again. But this is really just, they're trying to dig things up to weaponize against her, of course.
And Chase, what does the latest polling say about where climate policy ranks on voters' minds?
Well, there's a lot of different polling about this. Some of it shows broad support, like 75% of Americans want us to expand wind and solar. But there is a recent poll from Pew that was asking Americans how important it is for them to reduce their own personal carbon footprint. You see, not a lot of support there. But, the other side of this is that climate change isn't really an individual problem, as this question suggests. It is a collective problem. And we can actually have a collective impact on climate change, on climate action, by doing things like showing up and voting. And not just for president, voting in your local elections too are really important, because those are the people that are making decisions about how your local community is going to adapt to the consequences, the impacts of climate change that are already here.
All right. Important reporting there. Chase Kane, thank you.
Of course.
Coming up, the IDF is facing a lot of scrutiny after a hostage rescue left more than 250 people dead in Gaza. Our NBC News Digital documentaries team takes a closer look. We'll have that right after the break. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world. U.S. and Canadian fighter jets intercepted 4 Russian and Chinese bombers flying in international airspace near Alaska yesterday. This is the first report of Russian and Chinese bombers flying together near the U.S. While the planes stayed in international airspace, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin emphasized that the U.S. remains vigilant and ready to respond to any provocation. This incident highlights growing military cooperation between Russia and China. A man suspected in a nearly 20-year-old California murder has been arrested in Mexico. His name is Luis Contreras. Police say he has been the prime suspect in the 2005 murder of Alfonso Vera, which happened inside a house in Riverside County. Police say Contreras fled to Mexico shortly after the killing. With the help of the U.S. Marshals, he was arrested earlier this month. Prince Harry sat down for an interview for yet another documentary with ITV, which is scheduled to air tonight. In this documentary, Tabloids on Trial, he talks about his ongoing fight with British tabloids and how the battle contributed to his, quote, rift with the royal family. Harry has filed multiple lawsuits against the UK press in the past, and last year a judge ruled his phone was hacked by journalists working for the Daily Mirror. And new data shows Monday was the Earth's hottest day on record ever. The European climate service Copernicus says the global temperature average that day was 62.87 degrees Fahrenheit. Data shows that a warmer than usual Antarctic winter is partly responsible. After wreaking havoc in both Taiwan and the Philippines, a typhoon has now made landfall in China, forcing the evacuation of more than 150,000 people. Here's international correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer with more.
Typhoon Gemi has thrashed Taiwan, the Philippines, and now mainland China. Heavy rain drenching us here in Beijing as well. But further south, the storm has often reached the intensity of a Category 3 hurricane. The tropical cyclone moving across the Taiwan Strait and now targeting China's eastern seaboard. Gemi slammed into Taiwan, bringing up to 87 inches of rain to some parts over the last few days, causing wide-scale flooding. Schools and businesses have been closed, as well as the financial markets. Authorities say at least 3 people have died and hundreds are injured. The death toll in the Philippines stands at least 15, with the capital, Manila, paralyzed by relentless rain and flooding. There is trouble at sea, too, with 9 sailors missing off the coast of Taiwan after a cargo ship sank. A rescue operation is underway to find the missing crew members, all said to be from Myanmar. 3 other ships are said to be stranded near Taiwan. Heavy conditions also hampering efforts to contain an oil spill off the Philippines after a tanker sank in rough water there. Here in China, more than 150,000 people have been relocated from Fujian province, which is in Gemi's path. Flights have been canceled. Travel on waterways has been suspended, all in anticipation of gale force winds expected to pack gusts of more than 140 miles per hour. For Taiwan, Gemi has been the strongest typhoon in the past 8 years. It's expected to weaken as it moves inland and across China, but bringing extreme and often dangerous conditions with it.
Okay, Janice, thank you. Israeli forces launched a surprise hostage rescue operation last month, which managed to rescue 4 hostages held by Hamas. But it came at a devastating cost: Palestinian civilians. The NBC News Digital documentary team gives us an inside look at the rescue operation. Here's Danielle Hamamdjan with more, and a warning: the images you're about to see are graphic.
On June 8th, the world learned of a surprise hostage rescue operation in central Gaza. That morning, Israeli forces stormed 2 buildings in the Nuseirat refugee camp. In one building was Noah Argamani, one of the first faces of the hostage crisis. In a second building, roughly 200 yards away, 3 more hostages, Almog Merjan, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Ziv, were also held by Hamas. During the operation, the IDF said their forces came under fire from guns and rocket-propelled grenades. They said 1 soldier was killed during the fighting. After 246 days in captivity, 4 hostages were reunited with their families in Israel. But within hours, Reports emerged describing the devastating cost of the raid on Palestinian civilians. NBC News spoke to survivors on the ground to understand how a targeted rescue operation aimed at saving 4 hostages killed and injured hundreds of Gazans. Witnesses described a prolonged shelling campaign by the Israeli military.
Planes and tanks bombed the place for a full hour. These are the effects of the shell. My husband and son kept bleeding here, and my other son was in the street bleeding as well.
Videos verified by NBC News and eyewitness accounts detail evidence of Israeli attacks across a large area of central Gaza during the mission. In one video, people are fleeing south from a market on Nuseirat Road, approximately a quarter of a mile from the hostage rescue. Further down Nuseirat Road, explosions are seen along that same market.
In just seconds, a first shell dropped and landed on the market, and after that, a torrent of shells. Honestly, indiscriminate shelling. I had never witnessed such an event in my life.
And in a video released by the IDF, a group of paratroopers with tanks and armored vehicles are seen positioned 1 mile away.
We were surprised by occupation aircraft firing heavily towards the entrance, west of the city of Nuseirat. There are thousands of displaced people here. There were many tanks, about 32 to 33 tanks. The tanks were moving at an insane speed.
Noor Abu Khamis was in a tent encampment over a mile away from where the hostages were being held. She said Israeli helicopters opened fire on their camp.
They deprived me of my beloved son. What is the guilt of an 8-year-old? They killed him. He didn't have any weapon. Was he going to shoot at them? They told us it's safe. There are no safe places in Gaza.
Before we go tonight, it's time for the future of everything. In this age of AI, we're seeing awesome use of it in medicine and the arts, but can it help in the gym as well? NBC's Maya Eklund finds out. And Olympians are getting ready for the opening ceremony tomorrow, but for the surfers on location in Tahiti, the games are going to look a bit different this year. Coconuts instead of croissants and a cruise ship instead of the Olympic Village. We'll have more on the Olympics after the break.
We take a 5-minute ferry ride from the dock to the cruise ship. We got welcomed onto our home for the next week. And the rooms are the best part.
It's been 50 days since the launch of Boeing's starliner, but it's been anything but smooth ever since. Earlier today, NASA and Boeing announced they still do not have a return date for the capsule crew, which was only supposed to stay at the International Space Station for a week. NBC's Jesse Kirsch has the latest.
Hey, Valerie, the big takeaway from NASA and Boeing today is that there is still no firm return date for Boeing's Starliner spacecraft or for its 2 astronaut crew, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Those 2 astronauts continue to be on board the International Space Station with the Starliner spacecraft docked there, as teams have been investigating here on the ground as well what may have gone wrong. Officials say that the ground testing of a thruster here on Earth has been completed, and they are evaluating that data. One of their preliminary findings, officials believe that it is likely that the root cause of what has gone wrong with the thrusters is tied to a seal issue, but they are continuing to evaluate data. Officials say they now want to do fire testing of thrusters in space while the craft is still docked to the International Space Station. Officials also say, according to NASA, that they want to have an agency review done. Both of those items checked off of a list before the spacecraft could return to Earth with the crew. And we're told that that agency review at the earliest could be happening late next week. So we're talking about at least about another week, perhaps longer, that these astronauts could remain at the International Space Station. Here's part of what officials shared earlier today.
Right now, we're in the middle of the teardown of the thruster. So we have the thruster at the White Sands Test Facility. It's in the lab. It's been disassembled. and we're looking very carefully at the fuel on the fuel valve and the oxidizer valve. We are following the data, and we'll schedule that review when we need to. And then after that, we'll set the undock time.
To put this timeline into context, Starliner with its crew on board lifted off on June 5th. The astronauts were supposed to spend about a week on board the International Space Station. But if you check the calendar, they are coming up on 2 months almost that they have been on board the ISS. Officials say that if there were an emergency situation, they believe it is safe for the crew to get into Starliner and come back home. But again, there's still more testing that is planned for the days ahead, and there is no set return date for that crew and that capsule. Back to you.
All right, Jesse, thank you. At this point, we know we can turn to AI to help plan things like activities and meals. Well, now it can help you plan your workouts. It's a growing trend many people are considering instead of facing the gym solo or hiring a personal trainer. NBC News Digital reporter Maya Eaglin is here to tell us more and even conduct a little experiment. Right, Maya?
Hey, Valerie. Yeah, we put AI up against a personal trainer to learn more about the risks and benefits of using AI for personal workouts. Now, while AI might be a helpful tool for some, there are definitely some challenges with it. Take a look.
No trainer would start you without a warm-up.
Right.
So let's get into it.
Warm it up.
Warm it up.
If you've ever worked out with a personal trainer like Bobby Westside, you've probably had a workout tailored to your needs.
What I would see is a little bit of lack of ankle flexion here.
With a little extra motivation sprinkled in.
Very good.
But there's a new competitor making its way into gyms. Personal workout plans made using ChatGPT or other AI platforms. Here's how it works. You log on to ChatGPT.com or download the mobile app, and then type in what type of workout you want, including the areas you'd like to focus on. I wanted a similar routine to the one I did with Bobby.
Give me a 10-minute workout focused on legs and abs.
Then ChatGPT generated a plan for me to try.
Perform a regular squat, then jump. That's what it said. So here's the bicycle crunches. I think it's this, right?
Yeah.
And as you can see, there was a bit more guessing in my solo workout compared to the personal instruction with Bobby.
Can you make this workout harder for me?
Jonah Blatt, a physiotherapist in Ontario, Canada, has been experimenting with AI workouts for 7 months.
It really is hit and miss in terms of what you get out of it from a workout perspective. Some exercises make a lot of sense and were a really great fit. Others left me questioning why they would choose that exercise.
Blatt says he does a lot of his workouts at home, but anyone can customize their workout by letting ChatGPT know where they are, what equipment they have available, and what areas they'd like to target. Dr. Jeepak Chona is a sports surgeon and works with patients who use AI workouts.
Do you think there's any other pieces of advice for people who are deciding to use these AI machines for their workouts?
What you can get from these is a lot of useful information and a lot of accurate information. But what you can't necessarily expect is full comprehensiveness and 100% accuracy.
One study found that only about 41% of AI-generated workouts were comprehensive, meaning they included all 6 components of exercise. And if you decide to use an AI workout, one last important piece of advice.
I would really focus on what you're telling the AI when you prompt it. So that should be a very, very, very long prompt answering the questions that a trainer would already ask you, which is, what injuries do you have? What's your experience in the gym? Is there anything that you're not comfortable doing? You need to make sure that you're going about it safely.
Both Bobby and Dr. Chona told me you only really get out of ChatGPT what you put in. So it's really important to be as detailed as possible, stick to your boundaries, and remember to reach out to your personal doctor if you need to. Valerie, back to you.
Okay, Maya, thank you. And tomorrow is the official kickoff of the 2024 Paris Olympics. Chief international correspondent Keir Simmons shows us how the city and its famed river are preparing for the opening ceremony.
In Paris tonight, there are bleachers on the bridges and TV screens on the banks of the Seine. Months of worries over strong currents and water quality, mostly in the rearview mirror, as the river becomes the stage for a history-making opening ceremony from Notre Dame to the Eiffel Tower. That's as it should be, because the Seine, its banks adorned with cafes and booksellers or bouquinistes,
Voilà.
is older than Paris itself.
La Seine, c'est Paris, monsieur.
The Seine is Paris. You even say where you are in the city in relation to the river.
It's the left and the right bank, not the north bank and the south bank. It's because the river twists so often.
American historian Russell Kelly has lived here for 30 years.
That is the center of Paris.
And says Paris began on an island on the Seine, the Ile de la Cité, now known for its famous cathedral. We followed the river through picturesque villages for 3 hours to its source.
Antoine, welcome. Bonjour. Thank you. Welcome. This is the first bridge. It's the first bridge of the Seine.
And the right bank and left bank.
La rive droite et la rive gauche.
Antoine Herault is from Friends of Source Seine and spent his childhood here.
It's a magical river.
The Gauls, then the Romans, revered this place.
A water nymph.
In the 19th century, they built a shrine.
Oh, yes, you can see the water. Voilà, c'est là qu'est la source.
That's the source right there.
That's the source.
Whether the Seine is clean enough for Olympic swimming has been hotly debated. But up here, at the source, it's safe to take a sip.
It's fresh.
It's clean.
Yeah.
Our thanks to Keir Simmons for that report. That does it for us tonight. I'm Valerie Castro. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.